Do you take notes in either pads? Or?
I can.
Yeah, do you want to try that this time?
Sure, I'll just go to the agenda website.
That's what I just did, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've done that. Yeah, I've done it before.
So for everybody in the room, if you're going up to the mic, please make sure that your badge is name visible on both sides, please, so I can take down your name correctly spelled. Thank you.
Okay, so it's the time we start, and it's ISIS. The agenda is up there on the screen. I'll go to the update slide. All right, so we got that. We have a minute taker, Jabber Scribe. What was the last one? Meet Echo Support. No, we don't have that. So here's the note well. I guess part in bold I'm supposed to read. By participating with the IETF, you agree to the following IETF process and policies. If you're aware that any contribution to something written, set or to close in IETF context is provided by or covered by patents or patent applications, you must disclose the fact or not participate in the discussion. You understand that meetings might be recorded or broadcast, audio, video, photographed, and publicly archived. And other details are covered in those. Okay, so the agenda bashing, I have one item on this. Russ White was going to present the Open Fabric ISIS. He also just did that in routing working group. So I'm curious what the number of people that were just in routing working group that saw that presentation. Raise your hands. And who has not seen that presentation? Okay, Russ, you got, there's 2 to 4. And a lot seen it. So I think you're last. So everyone else. Yeah, just everyone's gonna walk out. Yeah. So Russ, raise your hand if people want to talk to him about Open Fabric. There he is. I think that's the only agenda bashing that I had. Did anybody else have any?
Yeah. So I was just Ethernet as it's maybe coming out like every class on any just like so I'm gonna
Just do it manually.
Start I can paste it in.
Okay, so the document status portion. So we have 2 RFCs that went forward, auto configuration and multi-instance, the BIS adaptation there that allows for multi-instance, well, multi-topology in multi-instance ISIS. And also my little tool kicked out 5309 and I was like, huh, I didn't think that that was a new RFC. And I had to ponder why that was there. It was there because we had errata published on it this last time. It was a relatively minor errata on the point-to-point draft that just had some clarifications on what to do with ARP.
And unnumbered.
And unnumbered links, yeah. And numbered or unnumbered was the clarification. We have the L2 bundles in the RFC EdQ. I don't know if you know where that's at. You don't have to. Yeah, so this looks like, I don't actually know what's holding us up at this point. Yeah, okay. So I guess we should expect it to move forward.
My understanding is it's within the finishing touches towards RFC, no major roadblocks.
Okay, so we're looking at that RFC soon. We have 2 working group last calls. The beer one is actually, that's actually in beer. It's kind of, you notice beer comes before ISIS there. So that's a working group last call in another working group, but it affects us. The bold and these, either way, are the presented ones. These are our updated documents. We have an adoption call for the Ginsburg ISIS TE app. We also have contention on that still, which we hope to cover in this meeting, and any else contention should be soon resolved. There's the contentious draft, or one of, and that was submitted by Chris recently. And we have some individual documents that have been updated recently, and we have presentations for the spine leaf and the Flex E. And that's the other TE proposal that's put together. So there's another topic. Have you heard anything on this?
Of course.
Okay, so the ADs want to combine the IGPs. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to refer to them as the IGPs, the link state IGPs. And go ahead, go to the next. So I asked for clarification, why do we want to do this? What problems are we solving? And we came up with these couple problems. It gives exposure to more experts, like where there isn't overlap. We get some new blood into both groups. And more people looking at the problem spaces that they face. There's less duplicated overlap work. I think that's the one that kind of drives this, is everyone sees like the segment routing extensions drafts that are literally duplicated, almost copy and pasted into both protocols specs. We didn't the last time this came up, we didn't have that as much. We had a lot of the trill work going on, and so when I ran the sort of stats on it, we were only overlapping like 20%. I haven't done that yet for this time around. I will. I suspect the number of overlaps are higher. So it does, I guess it's useful to look at it again. The issues that I saw with this that I put in here and are the groups have different audiences. Typically, OSPF covers a much larger audience and number of people or number of uses. ISIS tends to be like in a kind of a data center and a tier 1 area. And so sometimes the solutions look a little different. Like what looks better for one is maybe not as good for the other. Tier 1 is how you adopt changes and how quick you can make changes, things like that are maybe a little different. And also it may influence the choices to be the same. So whereas before it might have been easier to pick a different route for the protocols, or because we operate in these different spaces, I think that's going to be less doable if we're in a combined group. And I think the want is going to come up with a single solution for both. I think that's going to be the general intention most of the time. It may be harder to get work done trying to convince the other side. I mean, some people are ISIS folks, some people are OSPF folks, and they think about things differently. And we may get into these arguments that we wouldn't have gotten into before. And there are, for some people, they don't go to both groups, right? They're not interested in both protocols. So this does create more work. We can do, I put time in for a talk, so let me just finish this last slide. And then, so by more work, you can see that that's already going to start, because the proposal that I negotiated with Alia was that we would run a joint session next time, and that we would combine the mailing lists. So they will still be ISIS and OSPF mailing lists, but OSPF mail will go to ISIS and ISIS mail will go to OSPF. So we can start and feel over the next 4 months and the next working group what this looks like, right, and what it feels like. Thoughts?
So, Loa Anderson, can you go back one slide? I want to actually challenge the less duplicated overlap work, because you are extending the protocol separately. So you actually do the same amount of work. Now you do it in 2 working groups. The joint working group will have to do it in 2 separate documents. And it's not a given that that is actually less work because the confusion between the two drafts is potentially m- getting more confusion between the documents if you have them at the table at the same time. So, and especially the T extension, we have seen quite a nice work between the GMPLS, MPLS working groups and the separate protocol working groups. So I'm not. Everything else I think is fine, but the claiming less duplicated work, I don't think is a good idea.
Yes, so I think you're suggesting it's more subtle than that. There's still going to be some overlap because we can publish one draft and have two sections, ISIS and OSPF, in it with any kind of duplicated work or descriptions above it. The benefit there, I do see. I'm not all for this idea, by the way, but the benefit there is that you do have one place of the high-level description of what you're trying to do, right? And then you literally keep the mechanics down to just the mechanics.
By default, putting T solutions into the same document I think that's close to disaster. You have to have a separate document that you can refer to when you're doing design. And don't cross over to the other protocols and things there.
So Les Ginsberg, just kind of following up on Loa's point, I think it would be a big mistake to try to take a particular problem space and make one draft that extends both protocols. I think that would be very confusing. What would make sense to me, if we're going to do this, is sort of I guess it's the PIM, MBO, and D model, where they meet together, but there are still two working groups and two chairs. So, my 2 cents.
There is actually plenty of seating space here in the front row, please.
So, well, I mean, so Les, to that point, that's why I kind of requested the joint session. Is that what you're thinking, that would be enough to solve the issues that the ADs have recognized?
Yes, I mean, if part of the goal is let's get the same audience for both IGPs because we are solving a lot of the same problems in both working groups, fine, have one meeting. So now you get everybody attending together.
David Lamparter. So I would like to point out there's a single instance I'm aware of a common draft between OSPF and ISIS, which is the point-to-point over Ethernet broadcast thingy. I think that's both a positive thing and telling us that it's possible, but also a boundary on that simple, like it needs to be that simple to be possible. But also I think there's a misunderstanding on this slide in terms of areas, because my personal experience with operators is that it doesn't matter what the use case is to decide what protocol they use. It matters what they, as a person, really started with and are comfortable with. And I know a lot of people who run ISIS and smaller networks. It's not a large chunk, but still, I don't think this is valid to make as an assumption that the protocols are this clearly delineated in usage space.
Well, so David, I hear what you're saying, but the small groups I think are enthusiasts, right? I mean, they're not people that are coming to IETF and doing routing protocol or doing custom. I'm not saying they're not important, but OSPF I think has a wider scope of users, different types of users.
So I think the argument that I'm trying to make here is if you happen to be, for example, hiring a company that designs your network for you, they may very well put ISIS on your 2-router network that only has 3 subnets or something. Okay. So, and I've seen that happen.
Good.
So I support this proposal. I think one area where the 2 working groups I think have not been doing a particularly good job is in documenting use cases for extensions. The use cases in both of the IGP or link state IGPs are generally pretty similar, and so that work could certainly be combined. And perhaps part of the reason it hasn't been done is because we'd have to do it in OSPF and ISIS, 2 more drafts in addition to the 2 encoding drafts. And if it were only 1 draft for use cases for ISIS and OSPF, and we really agree upon those before we jump into encodings, that might have a great benefit.
Michael Abramson. So wouldn't we need to identify gaps in features between the currently and fix that disparity before this can be done, or that would be like one of the first things that we would start working on if this happened?
No, I don't think that it's a just that would be in the charter work, and I don't think that we would charter ourselves with the goal of making the protocols feature reaching parity on all features and not and doing gap analysis and stuff. I think it would just literally be running them together.
Okay, so in case one thing that you want to do requires more work on one protocol than the other, then that would over time just automatically fix itself for the things that are needed. Okay.
I think, AC Lindum, I think when we talked about this 3 years ago, we weren't as far along. Now we pretty much, it's different encodings, and we shouldn't get hung up on the size of the TLV types and the length and things like that too much with the encodings and try and say, oh, those have to be common, because then you run into problems. But, or, you know, there's a different level of granularity in the information. But now that we have TLV mechanisms for the base OSPF LSAs, you know, and we have implementations and we pretty much can do it all the same things. So it should get to be more of that. Now, granted, we're going to have enhancements like all the data center flooding optimizations that maybe, I mean, I think it might make sense to do them in one protocol first. And then if they're successful and adopted, then, you know, do it in the next protocol. But I don't think in terms of things you can do, I think you'll do it in a different way, but you can do anything in either protocol. Okay.
Jean-Maurice. I definitely support this idea of merging the working groups. Of course, there is some not fully aligned audience between them, but it's not a first group which would have people interested in some topics or not others. I've been attending TEAs for some time for some of the topics, not all. There are people involved in LDP and MPLS, not in RSVP. There are various working groups already covering multiple protocols with misaligned audience, and it's not an issue at all. On the other hand, it could also be beneficial because sometimes people get lazy, they push an extension in one protocol and forget to promote the other one, while there are some people who could be interested in having the same level of feature in both. So combining working group will help address those missed feature on some corner cases. So I support that. Thanks.
Can we get just some sense of the room, of the people who think that merging groups might be a good idea? Any people who seem to believe that merging groups is a bad idea?
By the way, that was about a 50-50 split.
Okay.
Yeah, so this will need more discussion. We're going to do the joint sessions. I personally like the idea of stopping there. And that's just my personal opinion. I think we can solve a lot of the problems by running a joint session. I don't think that we have to necessarily have an IGP group. And also, it'll change the work makeup, and I may end up having to review a lot of OSPF documents. I don't like that. Okay.
First one is Les.
Did you do? Oh, you need to plug something in.
I'll do your slideshow for this.
Does it work?
Wait, 1 second.
That was too obvious.
That's your firewire. That wasn't you.
Okay, I'm Les Ginsberg. This is an update on the TE attributes draft for application. Just a reminder of the motivations. We wrote, oh, this doesn't work.
The mic doesn't?
No, I mean, I thought I was gonna.
Oh, that's a, that was giant, beautiful screen.
Yeah, that's all right. I just thought I could be like a real TV host or something, but so we did this for principally because there currently is no way to deploy multiple applications and have an indication of there's only one way to advertise link attributes per link, and there's no way to indicate which set of advertisements should be used by a particular application, and whether the advertisements on a particular link are not to be used by a particular application. So that's the problem we set out to solve. Acknowledgement to Peter in the OSPF draft, because that was the initial definition of the problem and a solution. And this is equivalent to Peter's draft in OSPF in terms of the solution. So what are the requirements? We want to indicate on a per application basis which links have advertisements that are to be used by a particular application. Note that this is not enabling an application. It's not an indication of whether the application is enabled on the link. It's an indication of whether the advertisements are to be used by a particular application. We want to be able to advertise per application values. We want to have efficient encoding, so there are certainly deployment cases where the same values on a given link can be used by multiple applications. We don't want to have to needlessly advertise the same value twice. We want to be able to support incongruent topologies, meaning that there's a subset of the links in the given topology where a particular application wants to use the advertised values, and another application may want to use the values advertised on a different set of links. We want this to be easily extensible. We have 3 applications, standard applications defined at the moment. Perhaps a few years from now, we'll have 5 or 6, who knows? We don't want to have to revise the protocol when that happens. We want to be able to support partial deployment and have this be backwards compatible. We do not want to upgrade one node of the network to support this and have to do something on all the legacy nodes in order to make them continue to work. And we also want to be able to support BGPLS, and we want to be able to advertise the values for all of these applications in BGPLS. So this is covering mostly the changes that have occurred since the last IETF. We got a bunch of comments that said, in addition to standard applications, we'd like to be able to support user-defined applications. So we've redone the format of the TLV, and we now have a standard application bitmask, a user-defined application bitmask, and the lengths of each bitmask before we actually advertise the applications themselves. So this is just a bit more detail on the standard application bitmask. There are currently 3 applications defined. One of them is the legacy RSVP-TE, then we have SRTE, and we have LFA. There's a new sub-TLV for the IS neighbor, the various flavors of IS neighbor TLV. And this is the set of sub-TLVs, the existing sub-TLVs that we advertise link attributes that will also be advertised in this new sub-TLV. That set has not changed since the last revision. We're also supporting this for SRLG. In the case of SRLG, we did introduce a new top-level TLV because the existing TLVs, we had one for IPv4 and one for IPv6. And we did not want to have to allocate 2 TLVs, so we've changed the format a bit so that it supports both IPv4 and IPv6. Okay, deployment cases. These are just some examples of what you would do based upon the nature of your deployment. So if you have just legacy RSVP TE only, you make no changes. You utilize the same advertisements you've always been using. If you have multiple applications, one of them is RSVP TE, and you have common attributes and common topologies for both applications, then you use the legacy advertisements. You advertise the new sub-TLV with the set of applications to which those advertisements, link attribute advertisements apply. And you indicate that there's a bit in there that you indicate, I want to use the legacy advertisements. So this basically costs you 3 extra bytes per link. But the actual attribute advertisements themselves have not changed, and they're still going out as legacy.
Les, I have a question on this. So having read both of these things, it seemed like the other presentation was just to not do anything. Is there a reason you actually have to advertise the legacy bit? I mean, why not just have the default be use the legacy values?
Yeah, this is a good question, actually. So with this draft, you have explicit indication of which applications are using which advertisements on a link. In Chris's draft, you do not.
Right. But
That's one of the differences.
Yeah, so yours would work, though, even if you just didn't explicitly advertise the legacy ones.
No. One of the comments, and Chris, I'll make the comment to you, and it works both ways, that I don't think the purpose of this meeting is for you and I to continue to argue. I think the purpose of this meeting is
For everyone
to hear
else
what
to do-
everybody else.
Everyone else decide.
So I'm not telling you not to speak, but I'll try to do the same in your presentation. Okay.
There's also an extended period of time you guys could argue after both.
No, that means only Chris and I can't speak, but so, yeah, I mean, if you don't have explicit indication, then when you advertise legacy, how do you say, gee, this new application, I don't want you to use those values on this particular link?
Couldn't you advertise a flags with an empty sub-TLV set?
So that's what we're doing.
No, for the new application.
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing. We advertise.
No, so I'm saying you advertise your legacy values, and then you advertise the new TLV with an application mask with the new applications with an empty sub-TLV set, so it doesn't use the legacies, or with new TLVs that it's supposed to use.
So this is, if you look at this slide, you'll see that in the application identifier, we have the length with a flag. So it gives you the length of what are these, let's say, the standard applications or the user-defined application. How many bits are we advertising? And you have a flag that says, I'm not going to actually advertise any link attributes specific to these applications. I want you to use the legacy advertising.
You know, I understand that,
So-
but that's not what I was saying. What I was saying was that if the default is to use the legacy, then all you need to be able to do is say what doesn't use the default, right? Because if you don't say what doesn't use the default, so everything uses the default unless you tell it not to.
Yeah, and that's a fundamental difference between the two drafts. Okay?
But it would work in yours too.
No, it
Okay.
does not work. Peter, you want to?
It's Peter from Cisco. So I guess the difference is that we always specify the set of attributes that we want to use. We never fall back, right? Unless we say LBIT, which means everybody use default. But if you advertise something for a specific set of applications or for an application, then you have to specify all the link attributes.
In other words, you do not have, unless
It's
you
a
have
positive
explicit,
advertisement, not the negative one.
unless you have explicit indication of which, for each application, what advertisements are to be used, whether they're legacy advertisements or the new advertisements, then you have no way of saying, gee, I have a bunch of legacy advertisements on this link, and I do not want this application to use them.
Do you union them? Okay. I can, maybe we can take this offline, but I don't understand why this is technically not feasible. If I advertise the TLVs that I want with the new application TLV defined, that's what the application should use.
So the other alternative is I want to use the same set of link attributes on a given link for both RSVPTE and a new application, and you're telling me I have to advertise them twice. Could be done, but it's less efficient. What we've defined here is a way of saying I don't have to advertise the link attribute values themselves
So
twice.
you're saying that this has to do with whether it's enabling the application at all on the link. That's the thing that you're getting at.
So do not use the word enabling. We're deliberately staying away from that. We are saying a set of applications, we're giving you an indication as to whether these attributes are to be used by this application. It says nothing about whether the application is locally enabled on that link.
Okay, well, what I'm saying is that if you didn't specify anything, then all applications are enabled for those legacy values.
And that's exactly what we don't want to do.
I understand.
Okay.
I don't understand why.
Because then if I don't do that, I cannot support incongruent topologies.
That's about enabling links on the application.
No. One of the keys is to understand, number one, we're not talking about enablement. We're talking about using a set of advertisements. And we're saying for a new application, we are not making the assumption that all of the links for which RSVPTE advertisements are being made are also useful for this new application. The easiest way to think of this is I have a partial deployment of SR. I'm running RSVPTE and SRTE in my network, but I do not have a fully congruent set of links for both applications. So I have to be able to say on these links, SRTE is not using the RSVPTE advertisements.
And that's subtly different from not enabled how.
It's, if you have to look at the encoding, okay?
But lest this is in a certain way a bit of a deviation how we historically used to migrate protocols. I mean, when we did actually the IP reach to extended IP reach transition, right? There was always this sort of inclination to, make sure that the metrics are congruent, right?
I don't. This goes. I know we could deviate on this for a good while. I don't think that description is accurate. One of the reasons that the extended reachability TLVs were invented was because the old style metrics were too limited. 1 to 63 was just not enough range for us. And how you migrated is one thing, but the eventual goal of migration was now I have a much bigger metric space to play around with. The goal wasn't to stay within 63. So I don't think these two things are
during the
analogous.
migration window, you want to ensure that both new style actually also goes with 6-bit metrics as with old style, and after you have converged your network to the new software set, you can assign your fancy metrics.
But
so
here we're
during
talking,
the migration window, there was congruency. That's what I'm trying to say.
but here we're talking about different applications. In the migration between old style reachability and new style reachability, you are not changing the base functionality of the protocol.
The difference is that you want to be able to have this congruency. And I would say there is no historical precedence for that.
I would say that the scenario you are describing is not at all analogous. Okay, we're talking about two different applications. We're talking in this, if we use the examples of RCPTE and SRTE, there is no requirement that says you must run both of these on the same set of links. That's completely different than running ISIS and advertising reachability in two different ways.
So I have to ask again, when you say running on the same or different set of links, that is not enabling on those links or not?
So it's easy for me to fall out of my strict use of terminology And I emphasize again, we've made this point in the draft. I'm making the point in the slide. I apologize for
It's
miswording.
I don't understand how it isn't, so that's why I keep attacking.
So the easiest way to understand this is to use the example of LFA. I advertise link attributes for use by LFA. Maybe some node 5 hops away based on what I advertise decides which LFA he prefers. That says nothing about whether locally I'm using that link for repair. That's based on a completely different configuration. How am I doing?
Yeah. Well, so let's keep going, and because we have Chris presenting, then we also have time to sort of also, like we had both, that digress further.
Okay. So where were we? Okay, so again, this is the deployment case. You have 2 applications. They are using the same set of advertisements. What you do is you use the legacy advertisements because one of the applications is RCPTE, and you include this new sub-TLV that says here SRTE is using the legacy advertisements on this link. You do not have to duplicate the actual link attribute advertisements themselves, which is what takes up all the space. Here's a case where you have multiple applications and at least some of the attributes are not shared with RCPTE, and or there are some links that you want to use for the new application. You don't want to use that link for RCPTE. You use the legacy advertisements for RCPTE. You use the new advertisements. In this case, you set the L-bit as clear, meaning I'm not using the legacy advertisements for the new application. And in those cases where your link attributes are the same on a particular link, you do have some duplication. These are a few examples of use cases. That hasn't changed. There is an alternative proposal. Chris is going to speak to that. Way back at IETF 97, we at least all did agree that we want one solution. We're talking about this both in OSPF and ISIS, and whatever we decide, we want both working groups to follow the same solution. We have asked for working group adoption. By my last count, this was the opinions expressed.
They're not all public.
That's completely true. I'm just reporting what has been on the list. Okay. So this is the comparison between the solution described both in the Ginsburg draft and the Senate draft, and the comparison against there's a pair of ISIS drafts. The equivalent, the second draft, the TE attribute set draft just came out pretty recently. There isn't an equivalent in OSPF yet, but I'm assuming you would do the same thing in OSPF if you were moving ahead. So this is sort of a comparison of, again, the first column is the set of requirements that we had when we started out to define this solution. And we look at what happens, what level of support we have. Obviously, in our draft, we've defined a solution which meets all of the requirements. In the case of the competing draft, we still do not have a way of indicating attribute usage. The competing draft defines application enablement, which is a different thing. There is no way to support incongruent topologies, and this goes back to the discussion that we were just having. We don't have a way in the alternative proposal to say, I don't want to use this set of advertisements from the legacy protocol. The only thing I can do is advertise different values. And then we get into the backwards compatibility and partial deployment. In the case of our draft, there are no backwards compatibility issues. You can do partial deployments. You have to do absolutely nothing on the legacy routers. There's no configuration changes. You do have to be careful on the new routers as to how you advertise things. I've given examples of that. But for the legacy routers, there's absolutely no changes required whatsoever. In the case of the alternatives, there is a solution proposed about using affinity on the legacy routers to filter out those advertisements that look like legacy advertisements, but which you don't actually want the RCPTE to use. The other important point relates to BGPLS controller support. Part of the alternative solution is to get away from standard bit assignments for applications and to have this all defined at runtime via configuration, which makes it very difficult indeed for BGPLS to support this. So with that, I don't know how you want to run this. Whether you want to put questions or comments
Yeah, I think
to the end.
any questions you have on the specifics of this one, you could do right now, but we do have like 15 minutes or so scheduled to talk about that.
Bruno Kran, Orange. I haven't read the draft, sorry for that, so I'll focus on use cases.
I'm so disappointed.
You presented 3 use cases. All are RZPT specific, so it's RZPT only, RZPT with other application, same values, on RZPT, other application, different values. So we have another use case, which is no TE.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I'm currently using TE advertisement for LFI selection.
Mm-hmm.
How do I use your proposal?
We,
Can I keep using the TE attribute just as is?
No, in that case,
No.
you'd simply use the new advertisements. There would be no need to advertise legacy.
Yes, but I don't have any issue currently. So my question is, I am going to be affected or not?
So
So I'm not running RZPT,
Mhm.
so I don't have any issue with inconsistency between LFA advertisement or RZPT advertisement.
right?
And with this proposition, do we have to be, would I have any interrupt issue or new things to advertise in the AGP? Or can I still advertise the TE, the regular or historic TE advertisement, just like today?
So I think you have to consider where you're starting from. If you have a deployment, for example, where let's say you fully deployed SR, you're using SRTE, but because today we have no way to advertise link attributes other than the legacy, all of your boxes are using legacy advertisements for SRTE.
Yes.
Okay. So in this case, if you have partial deployment, if you upgrade part of your network to support the new, then you have 2 choices. One is you can continue to use the legacy advertisements everywhere, and you can set the legacy bit for the new for the new boxes to say use the legacy advertisements, and you only advertise legacy. Or you can sort of prepare for the your eventual migration to completely upgraded set of routers, and you can advertise. You can duplicate the advertisements with the new advertisements and the legacy. You have both of those choices available to you.
And Cisco's going to make this really easy for him, right? By not making him set anything. I mean, I
Of
assume.
course.
I mean, when you say you set the L bit, it's just because it's on new software version, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we want to start getting into, how we define the CLI and.
No,
the
but I mean, his
implementation,
question
but-
from an operator standpoint is,
Yeah, yeah.
my network works. Why are you proposing something that's going to change the protocol in a way that might make my network not work?
Yeah, and I'm saying if you're happy, you can simply, you can use all the legacy advertisements that you're using today, and the only thing that'll happen is on the new boxes, they will send out an advertisement that says, please use legacy for SRTE. And from your standpoint, you should have to do nothing.
Okay. Can you add a section in the draft to cover
Sure.
that use case? Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Is that the order you wanted? I didn't actually ask you which one you wanted to do first.
The order you have listed, the PD protocols draft. Yes. So this is the draft that we first published in fall of last year, and we presented in Seoul. It deals with this one sort of very clear use case that that Les has referred to, and it does so in a very straightforward manner by advertising the protocols that are enabled on a link. So this is the same use case that we described in the draft and we've described before, but I'll review it again because it's been talked about quite a bit. So the actual use case that drove this was this proposal is where you have a centralized SR controller for doing traffic engineering, and it's learning about the network either via the IGP or BGPLS, learning from the IGP. And it needs to know the configured bandwidth on the network, the maximum link bandwidth attribute. So which is quite reasonable. They're all shown there. This advertisement from Y says, okay, the link from Y to Z has 30 gigs of bandwidth. Now, if it's just an SR only network, there's no issues. If there's an RSVP only network, there's no issues. Even if you have an SR and an RSVP network where they're congruent, essentially, SR and RSVP are all enabled on the same links, there's no issue. However, if you have SR on some links and RSVP on other links, then you can run into a problem. Because if you also have RSVP running, how does existing RSVP ingress routers, how do they figure out that a remote link has RSVP enabled on it? And so this is a typical advertisement here for ISIS, and this actually never got standardized for ISIS or OSPF. For ISIS, different implementations have used different criteria for deciding. So we worked together with Les and others to figure out what different implementations actually trigger on. What sub-TLVs they use to figure out, do I decide to include this link in the CSPF computation for computing RSVP signal to LSPs? And so this is the set of implementations with their origins obscured. And it turns out that, we weren't lucky here, that people decided on different things. And so, you can't just say, well, it was never defined, but everyone did the same thing. There is no de facto standard here. So for some implementations, the fact that maximum link bandwidth is advertised is going to make the RSVP ingress router assume that RSVP is enabled on that link. And in this particular case, the service provider is transitioning their network from RSVP, and they're moving it out of some parts of the network and transitioning that to segment routing. So they'll have scenarios where they don't want an RSVP ingress router to try to signal an LSP across a link that doesn't actually have RSVP running on it. It will fail the signaling, and then they'll figure out and try something else, but that extra signaling is not good. So we wanted a very direct indication of what protocols are enabled on that link. In particular, if RSVP is enabled on that link, to sort of clear up this lack of a standard way of deciding that.
So there's a short-term workaround, which is pretty straightforward, which is using admin groups. Basically, in this example, suppose that RSVP is not enabled on all those links on the left in red. You have an operator-defined admin group, say in this case admin group 4, that means RSVP is not enabled on this link. You include that in your constraints for CSPF, which is straightforward to do in all implementations that I know of. And that will solve this problem in the short term. In the long term, straightforward TE protocol sub TLV seems to make the most sense. For this use case, we specifically say we introduce this new TE protocol sub TLV, which has a bit that says RSVP is not enabled or RSVP is enabled. And then we don't have to worry about these different implementations. So long term, this seems like a reasonable approach to having a link advertise exactly what it is capable of supporting. It can, in this case, it can support RSVP signaling to address this use case. The proposed encodings are pretty straightforward. It's a new sub TLV inside of TLV 22 and the appropriate V6 and MT multi-topology versions. And it basically, at this point, defines two flags, an RSVP flag and a segment routing flag. Now, we've gotten some feedback on this proposal about the precise interpretation of the segment routing protocol flag. The concern that's been expressed is that the segment routing topology is basically congruent with the IGP topology. That's important for running one SPF computation, basically, and not having different topologies. So we shouldn't have a flag that can be interpreted as modifying the segment routing topology, because that creates ambiguity about what topology to run the SPF on. So that seems like a valid concern. We think there's a valid use case for this segment routing flag, since it can be useful for an ingress router or a centralized application to know whether or not it should actually be expected to be able to forward traffic over a link using labels distributed with SR. So it's useful information. So to address this concern, we're proposing to describe this valid use case and also explicitly say that the presence or absence of this SR protocol flag doesn't affect the SR topology. In particular, it doesn't affect the shortest paths computed on the topology. So with the original version of Les's TE app draft, I thought these two were actually in conflict. That is, but the latest versions have made clear that he doesn't want to, his draft does not, the advertisements don't say anything about enablement. This is a clear, so I don't think these two drafts actually conflict. The following draft is in conflict with Les's, and I think is an alternative proposal, but this draft isn't in conflict with Les's, I believe. So as a step forward, we'd like to publish the updated version with the text that addresses these concerns about the SR flag and request the chairs to start a working group adoption poll. So that's it on the TE protocols bit, basically.
Quick observation.
Who are you?
Ravi Torvi, Juniper. So both the drafts, right, are playing with the topology and pruning or adding a link. So you're really working, trying to use the T attribute to come up with different topologies. Wouldn't this be treated as multi-topology instead of?
So no. So I mean,
this is inline.
So RSVP, you can prune the topology, and I mean that's done all the time. But different implementations. So back in this version here. So in this slide here, it's RSVP is on those links that aren't red. Okay, and RSVP supports that. Segment routing, really the segment routing topology and the IGP topology are congruent.
So congruency and coloring, right? What we are talking about is multi application attributes for a same link, right? And how you use it for your computation is a different matter. But you're fundamentally looks like the conflict is really about how do we make support incongruent topologies, but it is not a problem of T attributes.
So I mean, there's two. So this is a very specific use case. Okay. So I have another presentation on that directly addresses the use case that Les's draft addresses. Okay. And so
yeah, all I was trying to say is you don't want to solve with this incongruent topologies. Maybe there are different tools of it.
So we had some discussion back in Seoul about multi-topology specifically. But I mean, when you say multi-topology, do you mean multi-topology extensions?
I mean,
those
you're trying to come up with different topology for different application. You're dealing with different topologies. When you talk about
the way that multi-topology extensions are actually implemented, they're very specific to the IGPs. That's probably an even bigger hammer and worse hammer than the one being proposed by Les, in my opinion.
So, Chris, I'm not speaking against you.
Right.
I think this is something we agree on. What all of these drafts are talking about is a particular set of applications. We use traffic engineering in particular. We're not talking at all about modifying the base IGP topology and how the standard IGP SPF is calculated. That's not in scope for any of these drafts. I hope we're in agreement on that.
Yes, we are.
AC Lindum. And for SR, if you're using the base algorithm, it is the IGP topology. You know, I mean, there's tweaks you can make, but if you're just doing base segment routing, the base algorithm includes everything that's in the IGP topology.
Correct.
Hari Sitaram. So the previous slide, the
previous slide?
Yeah. So we just explain the problem in terms of incongruent topologies between two protocols per se. Why isn't this not a good enough solution? I imagine, practically speaking, only either of these will exist in the long term in the network. Maybe that's not a point of consideration here while we standardize, but wouldn't this be good enough?
It depends on the customer, and there's a lot of extra configuration involved. Long term, they would rather not to have to worry about it. It's things that are transitional often end up lasting for a long time, and so kind of leaving this festering might not be such a good idea.
And
I think there are other use cases for this as well. As I mentioned, in SR and even, whoopsie. Are you, okay. They were moving the slides on me. So I think it's a general use, fixes a problem that has existed for a long time, has been sort of not visible because RSVP just sort of worked and all the topologies were congruent. I think this is a clean solution that is worth pursuing. So actually a scenario, suppose you had a link that never had RSVP on it, but you wanted to, you had RSVP in some part of your network, had a link that never had RSVP on it, and you wanted to be able to advertise the bandwidth for that link. That's kind of a problem where this solution is, the workaround is sort of less desirable. So.
Chris,
Okay.
final question from my side. Is it fair to say that your draft always assumes congruent topologies versus Les's draft allows to advertise different bandwidths for different protocols?
So this draft doesn't address what Les's draft addresses. It's the following draft that addresses the ability to advertise different values.
So with this one, do you just try